Hello. I'd like to talk about a specific tool on pocket knives and multi-tools. And that tool, as you see in front of you, is the awl or bradawl or the reamer or punch, whatever you want to call it. People give it different names. I suppose all of the above is correct, but I know it as a bradawl. So if you don't know what an awl or a bradawl or a reamer or whatever, if you don't know what those things are, I'll explain it to you. But if you are familiar with it, then you already know what it's for. But I also do have some other uses for this tool. So a bradawl is a tool for basically poking a hole through wood or any material actually that is able to pierce. But it's mainly used for wood. You poke the hole using the bradawl to, well, you could use it for multiple reasons. You could do it to start off a hole for making it easier to drive a nail into a piece of wood, or more commonly for driving a screw through a piece of wood. But there are other uses. It is also used for punching holes in leather. Now, I do have a dedicated woodworking bradawl right here. As you can see, it's got a reasonably fine tip. That's for poking into the wood, and I'll just demonstrate that right now. So that's what a bradawl is for, and that's what all these tools right here do. Now, as you can see, I have multiple Swiss Army knives. I have a couple Leathermans, which are not on the camera, and I do have a couple other. Well, I've got a camping knife, I believe. It's a Rough Rider, but it's mostly Victorinox and Leatherman, and there is a Boker there in the corner. Now, I will say on some of these bradawls, on these multi-tools, there are secondary tools built into them. Obviously, being multi-tools, you want as many implements in the smallest space as possible. So on the Swiss Army knives, you see this little hole here. That is a sewing eye. I'm not entirely sure how you use that, but that's meant for sewing. So I feel that's necessary to mention. And the other one is the hook on this Victorinox Swiss Tool Spirit. The Swiss tool doesn't have that. You can also see here on the Leatherman that it has the sewing eye, and I'm just gonna go through, just gonna show the different shapes of these bradawls, and I will mention a couple secondary uses, although it is nothing too exciting. So on some of them, such as the Swiss Army knives, it does have a grind to it. This edge is sharp. I believe it's chisel ground, and that's supposed to make it a little bit easier to bore a hole. You can see this grind out here. I'm not really sure why that is. Maybe just to make it easier to drill, I'm not sure. They don't all have that. This Vinger, for example, it also does not have a sewing eye, but you can see it's not sharp at all. Now, I've never actually used this before. I only got this knife recently. In fact, you know what? Let's just try it out on camera. Let's see how effective this is. Well, it punched the hole. It does what it's supposed to do, not that I did with it. But you can see it's not sharp anywhere at all, and it's not terribly pointy either. Although you can still see it. I still wouldn't want to be struck with this, of course. This is a Victorinox Farmer. It's also ground on one side. Now, if you notice, it's got this piece here. I'm not sure what you call that or why it's there. Personally, I find this to be one of the best bradawls on any multi-tool. I think it suits the knife far better with the tool opening out here opposed to a back layer tool. I think you can get, I just think it does it's much easier. You can see I can get a lot more pressure on that, and it's a lot easier to bore a deeper hole. but that's just my opinion. Your experience may be different. These all these tools pretty much work the exact same, and all of these that you see in front of me or in front of the camera, they're all good options. You can see here this Leatherman juice model. This one also has the sewing eye. Is very similar to the Victorinox. It's just a little shorter, and it's not very pointy, whereas the Victorinox is, but it still does an okay job, although you do have to apply more pressure. One of the only ones that I have here that's not a Victorinox or Leatherman is this Rough Rider. This is probably the longest out of them all. It's ground on both sides. Now, I've only ever used this once and the tip actually broke off, so that's not very good. It bent really quickly, but that's because it was so thin. It came to such a point that it just wasn't strong enough. And being a Rough Rider, these are made in China and they're not very expensive, so I can't imagine the steel being all that high quality. But even then, this is a very effective bradawl. If we compare this Boker, this is the tech tool, I'm not sure which number, to the Victorinox, Boker pretty much copied Victorinox. Honestly, I'm not surprised. Victorinox does make some really good products. So does Boker as well. Quite a few tools on the Bokers are copied. Now, I believe Victorinox has possibly been making knives like this for longer than Boker, I could be wrong. But usually when you see this bradawl, it's usually on a Swiss Army knife. Now, one thing I will say is this Boker comes to a much finer point. It's much pointier than the Victorinox. But you can see it's very similar, although this is a bit thicker and wider than the Victorinox. But for the most part, it's the same shape. As you can see here, this Swiss soldier's knife does not have the sewing eye. I don't really know why. That doesn't really make much sense to me. With it being a soldier's knife, I would have thought I would have had the sewing eye. Because, well, I believe in the army you get issued a sewing kit. I may be mistaken, I don't have any military experience whatsoever, so I'm just assuming. But I do believe in the military you do get issued a sewing kit, and it would make sense to have the sewing eye. I mean, I believe this knife is built to the specifications of the Swiss military, so why they would not include that simple little thing, I do not know. But anyway, it works just the same as the rest of them. The only other one I have here is this. I've not got a clue who makes it or anything about it. All I know is it's made in Japan. It's clearly well used. You can see there is some damage on the bradawl. I wouldn't know how to fix that. I assume you'd have to sharpen it to get those chips out of there. But it's also one of the longer ones, and it is ground on one edge, chisel ground. Okay, so the other point of this video. Now, I do have 2 or 3 other uses for the bradawl. So, like I said, the bradawl is meant for piercing holes in wood and leather and thin metal as well, I suppose. If you had a drink can, I'm more than sure I'll be able to punch through that. Not really sure why you'd want to, but I'm sure it could be done. But the other use is for untying knots. Now, there is a specific tool for untying knots, and that's called a Merlin spike. And some pocket knives do have them, such as this John Nolan Navy knife. This tool here is the Merlin spike, and this is for rope work. I believe this is actually designed for tying knots, but I don't know how to tie knots with it. But they're also very good for untying knots. And you do that by just sliding it into the knot, and it makes it loose. Well, most pocket knives and multi-tools, I've never actually once seen a single multi-tool with a melon spike, and I personally find them to be really useful tools. Usually you only see a melon spike on tools with only a knife and a blade, and occasionally a can opener. But as you can see here, the bradawl is a very common tool on Swiss Army knives and Leatherman multi-tools, but it too can be used as a melon spike if you're careful. Now of course you have to take more care doing it with a bradawl, because a bradawl is of course a sharp implement, and there is that risk of cutting yourself. This is a little awkward to do behind the camera, but it can be done, bearing in mind this tool is not designed for this job. But you could do this with most bradawls. Of course it would be easier on this style opposed to this style, just because you have a better grip. But that's an option. Another option, another use for these bradawls, or on any tool or multi-tool or knife, is to clean your fingernails. Instead of using a knife. Some pocket knives do have a dedicated nail cleaner and nail file, such as on this Wenger, but not all of them. But like I said, most of them have a bradawl, so that is another secondary use. You could also, if you really wanted to, use this as a marking knife. Now this is something I've just thought of as I speak. If you have a straight edge, such as a ruler, you could use it as a marking knife to mark a line, obviously for woodworking. And of course, if it is one that is sharp like this, you could use it as another knife. Obviously that only applies to ones where they open like the knife, opposed to a backler tool. Now, another option for the bradawls that are on the back of a Swiss Army style knife is in self-defense. Now this is something I've just thought of here and now as well. I didn't really plan to mention this, but I think it is noteworthy. If you have the tool open and you hold it like this, now this is kind of digging in, so maybe not the best of ideas, and depending on where you live, this may be illegal. In the UK this would be illegal, so don't carry these for self-defense, even though you legally can carry these. If you're caught with these and you say it is for self-defense, well, it's going to get confiscated and you're going to go to jail. But that's just a look at some of the different styles of bradawls on these pocket knives and tools, and some of their secondary functions. I hope you found that interesting and useful. Thank you for watching, and please leave a like or a dislike. Alright, I'll see you later. Goodbye.